You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by Han Solo. That's right, the man with the Wookiee. I was thinking about not doing a show today, but then there's been so much going on. I wanted to keep the news coming, and it's really important to keep going because there's so much information on all sorts of city subjects and all sorts of federal policy, etc. So, I wanted to keep it going. But I do know that for me today, I imagine, all of you guys are feeling this way actually, but we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, but we're also kind of hitting the wall of the marathon in this pandemic. And so, it's really hard kind of day in and day out to stay focused and motivated. And I'm lucky that I have two amazing paid interns to do edits for Talking Headways and log the news into our website for the newsletter. But ultimately, me, I control my own destiny. So, it's good in a way that if I go down, not much else happens to a lot of other people in terms of like livelihood and things like that. But it's also, it can also be a bit hard sometimes to get motivated to do a Monday show or, keep things going, do the newsletter every single day. One of the things that's kind of, something I pulled from my college experience and even high school experience as a runner was, you don't see the results, each day individually, you see them over a long period of time. And so we've been doing the newsletter since 2006. We've been doing the podcast since 2013. And so, this is something that's a long-term thing, but some of those days, it's hard to put your shoes on and get out the door. And like I said, I don't plan on stopping anytime soon, but I also don't want to sugarcoat any of the way that all of us are feeling or some of us are feeling. It's hard. It's hard for those with you all, that have kids that are schooling at home. It's hard for the folks that can't see their coworkers face to face. You have to go on Zoom. It's hard. We can't blow off some steam on a Friday night just by leaving the house. A lot of us are still staying in. And not to mention some of the relentless stream of bad news. Bad seems to be elevated more than good, and the infighting on social media. So I feel like I'm checking out more and more with social media a little bit, but because it's so brutal. But I do also want to let you know that I hear you and I'm there with you. And today I feel a bit tired and a bit cold from a change of weather, but we're gonna jam this out. We're here. We're gonna do this, and I appreciate all of you for listening and coming along for the ride. This is not me gonna be a negative Nancy for the show. It's just a negative person. Oh, Nancy. But we're going to just keep it going. So, we're going to jam it out, like I said. And also we've got a winner for the scarf. So that's exciting. A couple of weeks ago, I said that if folks, leave reviews on iTunes, I saw somebody goes, did that. If you, reply or respond to the podcast in any way, the episodes, obviously Eric Weber was here and we had some good responses to that. So I said I'd give away a scarf to some of the folks. So I have a name that I pulled out of a hat. We shuffled it around and I pulled it out. So drum roll, please. And the winner is Rye Beck of Indianapolis. So thanks, Rye, for tweeting and replying to the show. I'll reach out to you to get more mailing information so I can send you the scarf. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you for listening, and we really, really appreciate it. I'll probably do this again soon because it's super fun to give away these scarves, and I know everybody really likes them because people keep wanting to order them, so I appreciate that as well. And thanks to everybody who participated. We'll get you a scarf eventually, I'm sure. But let's do it again sometime. So this is episode 84. Shut-ins Anonymous 101 is in session. Welcome to our session. All of you are with me on this, I'm sure. And then also, before we get to the show, I want to let folks know that they can get this podcast wherever you find your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and of course, Apple Podcasts. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and subscribing means you get both this show, Mondays at the Overhead Wire, and Talking Headways on the same feed. 2 fun podcasts, 1 great channel. So we've got some great shows coming up for you all on the Talking Headways podcast. I'm really excited for that. Yona is coming back soon for the annual transit review show. So I know that I've heard folks asking for that one recently, and that's That's coming soon. I'm going to record that soon. And then we've got some really great ones too. Carol Martins came on the show to talk about his book, Transport Justice, which is a really great book. I really highly recommend it. We'll talk about it. We recorded for like an hour and 45 minutes. So I'm going to chop it down a little bit, but hopefully you guys get to hear what we were talking about because it's really big stuff. And I'll talk about it a little bit later, actually today as well. And I just want to say, thank you all for listening each week. I mean, it's amazing that you guys keep coming back and listening and supporting the show through Patreon and all those things. So, it's not lost on me that you guys are super supportive. And that's kind of why I wanted to keep on doing these shows because it's awesome to hear the feedback and the responses and excitement about the shows and about learning, because that's what we want to do is we want to learn more about the world. That's my goal. And I hope you all are on the same page. And I think you are because you keep listening. So thank you. Okay, so, well, we should just get into it, right? We're going to just get into the news, might as well. So first up, the wastefulness of the internal combustion engine. New research shows that vehicles with internal combustion engines will go through 17,000 kilograms of materials in their lifetime versus just 30 kilograms for batteries if they follow strict recycling rules. The material includes gasoline and motor oil when you're thinking about the 17,000 kilograms of materials. This piece was written in The Guardian by Jasper Jolly from a research paper in Transport and Environment, which is a international EU, I think, think tank, and they do lots of really interesting work. I didn't think about this, but man, there's a lot of material that goes into operating a gas-powered car. I didn't even think about changing oil or all of this. I mean, I should because they always worry about when you change your oil, you don't dump it to the sea and those types of things. Make sure you take it into your Jiffy Lube, et cetera. But there's gasoline you go through that gets, burnt. There's motor oil that goes through, you have to take out and it gets messed up. Other raw materials. It's just a lot of stuff that we use to go and, drive around in these internal combustion engine cars. And, a quote from the article, over its lifetime, an average fossil fuel car burns the equivalent of a stack of oil barrels 25 stories high. If you take into account recycling of battery materials, only around 30 kilograms of metals would be lost, roughly the size of a football. So you can see kind of the difference that they're talking about there. Now, we should be clear that they don't include the fossil fuels burned to create the electricity for the EVs, but they're assuming all renewables in the future will be non-polluting. So that's kind of makes a bit of a difference. But at the same time, we'll get there. I think we're going to get there. I think we learned that it's really important to go all alternative in the future. Whether that's 2050, whether that's 2060, we'll get there. And I think that trade-off is going to be huge. But that's not to say that there aren't impacts from electric batteries either. I mean, obviously, there's going to be a lot more demand for different resources such as lithium and cobalt and nickel, or whatever material makes the battery of the future. I mean, we don't even know. It might be just hard water, for all we know. Just the science is gonna do amazing things, I'm sure. So there's also an article in Reuters a couple of weeks ago that was quick to point out that while EVs are a smart bet for the environment, they also open up a whole other front with environmentalists when it comes to mining materials that are needed to make batteries. And I don't have to tell you all, but mining is another thing that the Pebble mine and all that stuff is a contentious issue when it comes to environmentalism and thinking about the use of land, how that works out. So we could either be dependent on other countries for the rare earth metals that are needed for batteries, or we could generate our own. But there's some extraction that'll probably happen, and we need to actually come to grips with what that actually means. And so I think it's fair to point out both sides on this, that there's no easy answer. It's not a magic and silver bullet. It's just something that we're going to have to deal with. So next up, the internet and regulations. So, a couple of these things I've written about in my newsletter at the beginning, and I wanted to elaborate on them a little bit because I think they're really important. I like talking about environmental issues. I like talking about internet and broadband because it's such a huge part of our lives right now. Obviously, I like to talk about federal transportation policy, housing, et cetera. I mean, all these things are I'm not the utmost expert in them. I don't have an appointment at the Urban Institute related to a single subject, but I do love them all. So as long as it pertains to cities, we're in. But, when I woke up on a February morning, I saw in my Twitter feed that there was a bill from the House Republicans that would ban municipal broadband networks under the banner of promoting competition. This bill really has no chance at passing out of the Democratic-controlled House at the moment, but I can't believe anyone would actually put that on paper to just outright ban municipal broadband networks. We've seen them work in so many little smaller places, the Tennessee Valley Authority and others, Chattanooga, et cetera, that have been done really, really well. So I was just kind of baffled by this when I saw it. I kind of scrolled through and I didn't pay much attention until later in the day when I started reading articles. Municipal broadband is actually banned in partially or fully in 22 states. Arkansas has actually just signed a bill, their governor just signed a bill that would allow it in his state. But because of a provision in the appeals court ruling that killed net neutrality, the FCC has the power to preempt state laws related to broadband, unless broadband is banned altogether. So in part, it kind of stems from Comcast suing Chattanooga to keep the city from forming their own network, which the city did to much praise. Which brings us back around to that discussion I had about waking up and seeing tweets about the Republican House bill that would ban all broadband networks. It's actually the ban of all broadband networks is actually to kill FCC's ability to allow municipal broadband networks and do Comcast et al., AT&T, et cetera, bidding. I highly recommend this CNET article that I read where all this came from. A lot of this came from on February 19th. If you want to dive deeper into the weeds on why certain parts of the U.S. are falling behind, especially they cover Appalaicha and why it's important in ways to get broadband, especially municipal or at least public utility broadband there, because the other folks, Comcast and the AT&Ts, they don't want to serve those places. It's the same thing with electricity. The Tennessee Valley Authority was created because it's such a rural area, and so these organizations that can bring broadband to people that need it are really important. And it's silly that we're going to cut off our nose to spite our face just so we can allow Comcast and AT&T and whoever else to make more money. So, we're falling behind on this and we need to get better. But this also comes as the FCC is looking to redraw connectivity maps as well. So previously your census tract was connected if a home in the tract was. And I think I read somewhere in West Virginia, there were like 5 tracts in 5 houses in a tract that was like, several hundred acres big, and one house was connected. So they counted the whole tract, which is BS, right? It doesn't actually matter if one house is, if the other 4 aren't. So those are the types of ways we were measuring connectivity before, and it actually doesn't work that way. So that's a really bad. It's actually a really bad measure. I'm glad we're going back to the books to try to figure out how to determine who does and who doesn't, have broadband. And actually, estimates range, around 42 million Americans don't have good broadband access, according to a recent City Monitor piece. By the way, rest in peace, City Monitor. We loved you. So sorry that you had to end so soon. Folks, go check out their site if you get a chance. Unfortunately, that they only got 5-6 months to do something that were really amazing. But that's for another time. Of course, maybe we'll have somebody on to talk about the postmortem, because I think City Monitor was a really great product. In any event, so that's a lot of people that don't have broadband. So everything is connected, to this evil web of trying to promote businesses over people. And it's a little bit frustrating. And I know that people have been listening to this show for a while. And I feel like I'm moving lefter, but I'm not. I feel like I just want people to have, fairness and not necessarily be screwed by all these companies that are just going to profit billions and billions of dollars off of people just because they aren't allowed through law to access goods and services. So in any event, next up, another kind of evil corporation that we've talked about many times on the show. Uber is a cab company. So the UK's highest court determined that Uber drivers are employees of the companies instead of their own companies. The country's legal system employs the duck test, which doesn't allow a company that operates like a taxi company to say that it's not a taxi company. I mean, I don't need to tell you all that Uber is a cab company, do I? I mean, this is kind of common knowledge. I mean, obviously from a law and a rule standpoint in the United States, they can get away with that for some reason, but in Europe, it doesn't seem like they're going to, especially in the UK. And they're, basically, if it quacks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, if it floats like a duck. Now I'm thinking about Monty Python, a duck. She's not a witch. It's a duck. It's a cab company. So this comes at the same time as Uber is trying to get more Prop 22 like legislation passed in the EU. And so to that, I say, good luck, sirs and madams, with that. And finally, a bit of federal policy. So while we wait for all the write-ups about the most recent $1.9 trillion pandemic bill and how it pertains to transportation and housing and land use and all those things that we love, let's chat a bit about what's going on related to an infrastructure bill, which has been kind of the next target after the pandemic bill to go forward. There's been a lot of discussion about infrastructure being nonpartisan, but the news coming out of recent discussions on infrastructure, at least in the press, shows it's anything but. After sitting down with President Biden, some Rs have made it clear that they want a bill devoid of anything except for roads and bridges, while Ds have bigger ambitions and for their first major legislative move after the COVID relief bill. So I've been thinking a lot about this ever since reading UCSB professor Clayton Nall's book, The Road to Inequality. I think actually he was also recently on the podcast on the Monday. No, actually he was on the podcast because he was at the University of Iowa Symposium chatting. And he's, that book is awesome. It's called The Road to Inequality. We chatted with him about it on the podcast, episode 192. If you all have the itch to listen again or for the first time. His work shows that there is a long-term unintended consequence from transportation policy over the last 70 years as road expansion-heavy policy has actually aided in geographic and political polarization. So as we built the freeways and highways out from center cities, people who have a preference for moving outside of cities and into the suburbs actually, changed the political polarization of things. That's why you now see a rural suburban coalition and an urban suburban coalition between the two parties. It's very interesting to see how our transportation policy actually led to some of that as well. And this has led to a situation where we have, urban mobility projects, and they're seen by some as a quote unquote Green New Deal in disguise for some part of that package that they think is going to be a wolf in sheep's clothing to do other things besides transportation. But I think it's actually, needed to have an inclusive package of national improvements that get everybody to where they want to go. It seems silly that we're having this discussion, and it's like, it's all connected in a system. And I'm looking forward to hopefully having a discussion that recognizes this fact. But enter Secretary Buttigieg. He's been on a PR tear lately. He's going to the League of American Bicyclists and talking about the MUTCD. He's talking to Rolling Stone about nerding out on land use. He's speaking to the National League of Cities conference. There was an article by Politico's Sam Mintz today discussing equity. I'm not actually sure where he hasn't been. He hasn't been on Talking Headways. We'll hopefully try to get him at some point. But in each of those discussions, he'd said some great things, but I really, really want to see how the policies are enacted before we praise too much. He has a couple of levers that he can pull in terms of, discretionary funds and those things, and he's already done a couple of those things. But from a policy perspective, from the transportation bill, it's all up to what the House and the Senate are actually going to kind of pull the strings. And he actually talked about the importance of Fix It First on City Lab, the City Lab conference that just happened, and that being a part of the next transportation bill in a significant way. And we've talked about that here with Beth Osborne and Tea for America and other folks. But let's loop back here to my initial comments. Republicans want roads and bridges only. And Senator Manchin, who is a Democrat, but he won't do reconciliation on infrastructure, and like they did for the COVID bill. And there's going to have to be a discussion about what that means for getting something passed. I mean, listen to this from Representative Sam Graves, Republican from Missouri, the ranking member on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, quote, "The purpose of the Highway Trust Fund isn't to enact social change, but to collect fees from highway users and put that money back into the national highway system. I don't support changing the Housing Trust Fund split of 80% for states' highway programs and 20% for transit in any way that dilutes its core purpose, subtracts from states' ability to make critical highway and bridge improvements, or leads to other inequities, such as creating a larger gap between urban and rural infrastructure." Okay, that's a lot to kind of take in, I know. But look, if you design it right, these communities won't get left out. In fact, I'd argue that they're being left out now with this 80-20 split. Freeways in this country are built out. The whole purpose of the national highway system, and from Eisenhower's perspective, was to connect cities together, not to run through them. Making these 20-lane behemoths in Houston and Austin, et cetera, there's no need to expand the network anymore. And in fact, any expansions now, network analysts will tell you, will lead to diminishing returns and a whole other host of problems. And, I mentioned earlier, we're talking to Carol Martins about his book, Transport Justice, and we'll have his episode out, not this week, but next week. One of the things that we talked about was getting away from a mindset of fixing congestion or building roads for cars. we need to get to a place where we think about sufficient mobility for all users. And, ensuring people everywhere have access to jobs, have access to food and places of worship if they choose. That's what transportation is for. And that's what is going to serve urban and rural areas well. So with the way things are right now, it's going to be messy, as the goals of equity, climate justice, and impacts and mobility are often seen as by some as evil. When really, if we frame things correctly, if we actually design the program correctly, it's possible to get everyone on board in thinking about rural transportation and thinking about urban transportation and thinking about the programs that are needed to fund all of these systems equitably and make sure that we have this idea of sufficient mobility. Because ultimately, we need to get away from, talking about things in the context of Democrat, Republican, et cetera. We need to get to the idea of actually connecting people with the places that they want to go. So we'll talk about that more in the coming weeks, I'm sure. It's been really interesting to watch all this stuff. The political reporting on this has been interesting, especially as Infrastructure Week was kind of seen as a joke before. And there was joke articles written, and there's bills passed in the House that obviously were never going to get anywhere in the Senate last few years. But now there's actually going to be some movement. So we'll see what actually happens. I'm interested to see what that discussion looks like. I'm not against being bipartisan, but I am against, I don't want to cede them the language win. I want to actually create a bill that provides access to everyone. Like I said, we'll talk about that more, I'm sure. So, and finally, a couple of items from our national links. We post these on Fridays to Greater Washington, a series of top links, and some of them end up here, but there's lots of good stuff. I didn't want to, talk about these in much more detail, but I wanted to let you know that these are things that are going on, and I hope you enjoy them. Definitely check out Greater Washington or Streets.mn or Urban Milwaukee if you get a chance. Those are places that post the links. If you want to post the links on the week after, we're more than happy to share them as well. It's something that I'd love doing, putting together, news and information to share. Like I said, that's what we're all about, is sharing information on here on Mondays and at Talking Headways and at the Overhead Wire. So here are a couple of links if you get a chance to. Obviously, you're listening to it, but we'll have all the links in the show notes as well. So if you want to click through, there's some good articles behind this. So Heidelberg's move towards a carless city. The German city of Heidelberg is going beyond the current mantra of electric cars for climate goals and focusing on creating an environment conducive to active transportation. The mayor, Eckhard Wurzner, says he'd like Heidelberg to be completely car-free and aims to do that in part with an emphasis on car sharing, added cycling infrastructure, and making it difficult for cars to navigate neighborhoods through street design. That was by Jack Ewing of the New York Times. If you ever get a chance to go to Heidelberg, definitely do it. It's an amazing, amazing city. The forests are super clean. The running trails on the other side of the Schloss are awesome. The restaurants and the hotels are fun. The Christmas markets are amazing. Definitely get a chance. If you get a chance, definitely go. I spent Christmas 2000 there, 2000 or 2001, between 2000 and 2001. It was awesome. It was totally awesome. The first city to provide reparations. Evanston, Illinois is distributing up to $25,000 in housing funds to eligible residents in this year in an effort to right the city's past wrongs of racial segregation and redlining. The city will commit $10 million over the next decade to support the program, which aims to combat a lack of housing. Black community members are encouraged by the decision, but recognize that there's still much more to be repaired and given back. This was by Ashley Brown, Emily DeSant Marsville, and Ali Young in ABC News. Interesting that a major news outlet is covering this topic, which is really cool. Next up, Berlin's rent cap. 1 year in, Berlin's 5-year rent freeze has shown both benefits and downsides in its inaugural year. Rents are down by almost 8%, but new flats on the market are also down by almost 30%. Housing shortages and uncertainties have created a stressed market at a time, and time will tell whether the rent freeze is a success. I know there was a bunch of people on Twitter talking about this and saying it's a failure, and there's a Bloomberg person from a conservative think tank or something like that saying it's a failure, this is the worst thing ever, et cetera, et cetera. But this article by Ben Knight from Deutsche Welle was a little bit more even-handed in my opinion. So there's pros and cons to freezing the rent. Definitely check that out if you get a chance, if that's something that interests you. Here come the flying taxis. Public opinion about drones and automated air vehicles is largely negative, but Helsinki has shown that with an aggressive public participation and engagement, implementation of flying taxis can be made much easier because there is much less pushback. They've been so successful, they've had to develop a guide for cities and unmanned aerial vehicles and even translated it to English. That's by Dorn Townsend at City Monitor. Again, rips City Monitor. Man, I'm so bummed about that. Seriously, guys. This is such a bad rap there. And finally, Replica and Portland part ways. A Google-linked smart city data platform called Replica and Portland Metro in Oregon parted ways due to disagreements over transparency and shared data. Replica, born out of Alphabet Sidewalk Labs, was hailed as a potentially groundbreaking digital tool to track travel demand. The disagreement shows how hard it is for private companies and public agencies to get on the same page when they have different objectives. That was by Jane Wakefield in the BBC, and then there's a link inside to an article in the source material, which I can't remember right now, and I'm so annoyed because it was such a great article. But go check that out too if you get a chance. So those are the news items for this week that we pull out of the newsletter. The newsletter that I do each day. We go through 1,500 news items every day, and we pull out the 30 that we think are the most interesting. If you want to try a 2-week trial of that, go to theoverheadwire.com. I highly recommend it. We just had some really great signups this week, so hopefully folks will dive in and get the access to the archive as well. We've got 72,000 links tagged by topic and city that we've posted over the last 6 or so years, 7 years almost. So since 2013, it's pretty amazing how far we've gone with that. So that's how we make our living. So we appreciate everybody that is a subscriber to that as well as Patreon. And speaking of Patreon, this week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without it. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. We really do appreciate it. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We've had people sign up each month during the pandemic, so we're super appreciative of that. $2 a month will get you some stickers, and $10 a month will get you our bus-only scarf. And the bus-only scarf is back. Obviously, if you go to theoverheadwire.com, there's a link that you can click to buy the scarf and have it sent to your home. We have a bunch, so feel free to do that as soon as possible. And I also want to mention finally that we did produce an audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's 1909 classic, Town Planning and Practice. If you want to get your hands on one, go to raymondunwin.com. The book was super fun to produce, and if you're a history of planning fan, it's the very first book listed on the American Planning Association's 100 Essential Books of Planning. So check that out in audio. It's kind of like downloading a podcast. Okay, I don't know why I feel like I'm losing my voice here, but actually, I get so down sometimes before the show. I'm like, man, we got to go through and make sure we get it all right and get it all correct and do this and do that and do that. And then by the end of the show, I'm like, man, this was awesome. This is so much fun. It lifts your spirits. It really does. It's amazing. I've talked to Chrissy and Tracy about this before. We're kind of like, oh, okay, we got to do the show, blah, blah, blah. And then afterwards we're like, yeah, it's the coolest. So maybe just talk it out. So if you have a comment or a question, feel free to tweet at us or comment on any social site where the podcast appears, or feel free to email us at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. Again, we really appreciate everyone who entered the contest for the scarf to, make comments on our iTunes page, etc. We really appreciate that. It makes it easier for folks to find the podcast and listen if they get a chance. We've had some really great episodes lately. We're about to have some really good episodes coming up. I've got booked through May for the podcast, so we're getting there and we're doing some really cool stuff. And I hope that you all are liking the guests. I really enjoy it. We've got some books actually behind me. Are 2 books that we're going to actually cover soon. So one is How a City's Heart Connects Us All, Main Street. Mindy Thompson Full-Love, MD, forward by Andy Merrifield. This is a book from New Village Press that we're going to be covering sometime soon in the next couple of weeks. And then Street Commerce, Creating Vibrant Urban Sidewalks by Andres Sevstuk. Looking forward to that as well. Oh, Sevstuk. Sorry. I'm sorry, Andres. We're looking forward to talking about these books. I'm definitely looking forward to reading them, and hope you all feel good about what we come up with when we come. We read these books because we're interested in them. We want to talk to you about what's in the topic. On these topics, Main Street and Street Commerce. These next 2, I think, given the pandemic and everything, it's going to be a super interesting conversation. So really cool that they've written books that we can actually talk about in detail. And one of the things that I tell folks about the books and about, our discussions on Talking Headways and here on Mondays at the Overhead Wire. And why I think it's so important is that if you have a book and you go, or you wrote, let's say you wrote an article or you wrote a research paper, maybe it took you 6 months to put it together. And it's a little bit defeating, I think, actually, to get one line in like City Lab or the New York Times or something, if you're lucky enough to get that. But we come on and we have these authors come on, and I really love each of them. And we have them come on and we talk to them for 40 minutes about their book. They have so much information to share with us. It's amazing. And I want to thank them for writing the book. And that's why we have them on the show, so they can, obviously part of it so they can sell books, because that's part of, why they did it, to share the information, but also just to give them an opportunity to chat about it. I mean, if you've worked for something for 6 months or to like a whole year and you get, only a couple lines in a press release or something, the book tour is different, but if we can come on the podcast and talk about that for 40 minutes in depth, I just really love it. I love it so much. Puppies and Butterflies is the part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in the other sections. My Puppies and Butterflies has been CNN's Stanley Tucci's show, Searching for Italy. So for serious, this makes me so happy, this show. I don't know. I'm almost like, sometimes it almost makes me like want to cry, because I'm, part Italian. My family is from Liguria, and in part anyways, I'm a mutt of all kinds, but we still make ravioli the way they make it there. And, I'm just really looking forward to that episode, obviously, but just like the passion that he has for the food, the passion that he has for the regions and the people, and talking about all these kind of tough issues as well. Not, it's not in your face, but it's also, food and love and all that stuff. I love it so much. I love it so much. We'll discuss it again with Tracy and Chrissy, I'm sure, because and if you all are listening, watch the show, because we need to talk about it. We need to talk about some of the food in the show. And also, finally, if it's not too late to plant butterfly food, do so. Obviously, we're having kind of a crisis of global scale in terms of the loss of insect, biodiversity, biomass, I should say. Help out. They need us. And I know that a lot of people think, oh, insects, I don't like those. And that's true. I don't like mosquitoes either. But it's really important to the ecosystem, and we've actually planted a set of hummingbird and butterfly food in the back in our garden. So hopefully other folks can do that as well. You can still do it and make it in time. So definitely go out and get some if you get a chance. This is my bleeding heart cause for the week. So you can find me on Twitter at The Overhead Wire or at theoverheadwire.com. Thank you so much for joining us at Mondays at the Overhead Wire, and thanks to our generous Patreons for supporting this week's podcast. We really appreciate it. I really appreciate you all. We'll talk to you next time.
Talk